This year's NBA All-Star Game was the worst NBA All-Star Game of all time, and surprisingly, it's probably not because of the reasons that you would think. See, normally people have complaints with the All-Star Game because the players don't seem to care. It's usually just guys shooting open threes and getting open, uncontested looks at the rim. So this year, the NBA put a ton of different measures in place to try and get the players to care, to try and get the stakes to be upped a little bit. And at first, it definitely seemed like the players were giving more effort, playing more defense. And I thought, okay, this is going to be different than the All-Star games that we've become used to. The basketball being played was not the issue. It was actually entertaining. It was interesting. Guys were giving effort. The problem, though, is that over the course of a 3-hour time slot for the NBA All-Star Game, there were 42 total minutes of basketball played. Less than 25% of that entire time slot was spent watching NBA players play the game of basketball during the National Basketball Association All-Star Game. See, you want players to take the game seriously, but during the entire game, you have Kevin Hart, for some reason, over a loudspeaker talking about how the players are taking too many threes, how the centers need to get in the paint, how the guards need to be guards, actively talking trash about the players during the All-Star Game.
I want to see big men be big men. SGA, get the ball, do work, clear it out, do what you do. You wore the mustard colored sneakers. Make the mustard colors work.
I don't really understand how you can expect the players to take the game seriously when so much of the event is treated like an absolute joke by the broadcast team. For some reason, you had Shaq talking about Bol instead of the players that were playing in the game.
Why are you doing that?
Oh, stop it,
he ain't playing defense at the three-point line.
You know what? May 19th, Bol versus Wembanyama.
You know what? We need to stop. We need to.
Instead of spending time talking about the players that were there, how impressive of players these guys are, how exciting their play is. Instead of focusing on that, Shaq was focused on a guy who wasn't even there. What I don't understand is that after last year, it seemed like everybody was on the same page. Everyone just wanted a competitive basketball game. It doesn't need to be completely over the top. They don't need to treat it like the NBA Finals. Just, can they play a little bit of defense? Can they try not to give up completely uncontested looks? And can it just be a little bit more entertaining than a layup line and wide open threes the entire time? That's all anyone was asking for. They made the structural changes that would allow the game to be a little bit more competitive. There was some more incentive in place. They added the target score, which has some problems, but I don't think that was inherently the issue. They had the tournament format, which, again, definitely needs some tweaks. I think the fact that the Rising Stars team got to compete against the All-Star team was a little bit weird. I think that's something they should consider changing by maybe having an all-star snub team instead of the Rising Stars team competing in that competition. In general, I actually think the format was fine. I thought it initially did what it was supposed to do, which was make the guys try just a little bit harder. During that Rising Stars versus All-Stars game, there were moments where you could see the All-Star players were not necessarily worried, but they definitely flipped the switch once they realized the Rising Stars were staying in it. They were given a little bit more effort, and so they had to turn on the Jets a little bit and go a little bit harder, and it made for some entertaining basketball. The tournament in the format was not the issue to me, although the target score I think needs to be increased because, again, you look at a 3-hour time slot, the fact that only 42 minutes of basketball was played over the course of a 3-hour time slot is just absolutely insane. That's crazy. If this is a 3-hour time slot, what did they spend the other 140 minutes on? Fortunately, a Reddit user put together a breakdown of how much time was spent on each segment and advertisements throughout this 3-hour time slot. Huge shout out to Reddit user Forget Chain for putting this together. The intro with the ads was 30 minutes long. The pregame talk was 10 minutes long. So it was supposed to start at 8 o'clock. That was the listed start time. And it didn't start then. They had 40 minutes before the game actually started. Game 1 was 12 minutes total with 10 minutes and 7 seconds of actual game time. After that, we had the super bizarre Mr. Beast challenge where Damian Lillard was basically trying to make 3 half-court shots before this random audience member made 1. If the random audience member made 1 half-court shot before Damian Lillard made 3, then he would win $100,000, which I get it. Cool little halftime show premise. But it just lasted way too long to the point where Mr. Beast actually said, hey, we're about to go to a commercial, so you need to hurry up, and Dame, you need to either make a half-court shot, or the guy trying to win $100,000 needed to make one, and he ultimately ended up making a buzzer beater. That was kind of a cool moment, but overall, the thing was just awkward. So at this point, we've had 45 minutes of non-basketball, and game 1 lasted a total of 12 minutes. After that, we had game 2, which was 16 minutes total, with 12 minutes and 54 seconds of actual game time. After that, they had the concert, and I really don't think the concert was a problem. I think the problem was within the context of how much time had been wasted already. You get to this concert where everyone's like, we've hardly watched any basketball. So you get to this concert, and even though I thought it was a pretty good concert, everyone was just so exhausted at this point. If you're on Eastern time, it's like close to 10 o'clock. You're ready for the last game to start so you can watch it and go to bed. Then you get to game 3. And this is where just everything went completely off the rails. Now, game 3 lasted a total of 14 minutes in terms of actual basketball being played. But for some reason, whether it was the NBA or TNT or Turner Sports, right in the middle of the game when there was a timeout, they decided that they were going to do a 10-minute tribute to Inside the NBA. Now, keep in mind, this isn't Inside the NBA's last game of the year. They have through the end of the season. They still have the playoffs where Inside the NBA is going to be a part of it all. This wasn't some send-off where we're never going to see them again. But for some reason, they interrupted the entire game to do this 10-minute tribute where everyone's just like, guys, we've hardly watched any basketball. And you're going to stop in the middle of the game when the players are starting to get warm. There's starting to be a little bit of a flow. You're going to stop in the middle of the game to do this 10-minute tribute. It made absolutely no sense. So you've got the basketball and you've got all the stoppages for all these random little events and sideshows, which it kind of seemed like basketball was more of a sideshow relative to how much time was spent on everything else. And then everything that wasn't one of those two things was just commercial breaks. The commercial breaks were constant throughout the entire night, which I get isn't something that's unique to the NBA, but in my opinion, I'm willing to live with the ridiculous amount of commercials a little bit more if I'm able to at least watch a little bit more basketball. You want the players to take it seriously, but at one point, the Inside the NBA crew was out in the middle of half court in the middle of a game in fishing clothes. You had Draymond talking about how terrible the format was right before the All-Star game, which is mind-blowing to me.
Scale of 1 to 10, your thoughts of the format?
10 being the best.
Yes.
A 0. Sucks. Same basketball.
You want people to watch the game, right? Like you want people to stick around because in theory, they're going to get to watch something that's good. But you have a literal NBA player on a panel for the All-Star game talking about how bad the All-Star game is. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Why should the players care about this if you're going to have another player on a panel talking about how stupid it is? This is where there's such a big difference between the NFL and the NBA. The NFL is constantly talking about how good their product is. They talk about it with such seriousness. It's very thoughtful, and they want you to know almost to an annoying amount how good the NFL is, how good the sport of football is. They treat it like it's this sacred thing. But then you look at the NBA and you've got the media partners talking constantly about how bad the product is, how bad the sport is. It's not that complicated. We just want to watch basketball. Get rid of all the other stuff. Just give us the basketball. And again, it seemed like the players were trying at first, but then you stopped the championship game in the middle of it to do this 10-minute tribute. You think the players are going to watch all this happen and they're going to come back from that long extended break thinking that they should take it seriously? No, they came back and they looked completely disinterested and they treated it like a joke because it was a joke. I don't blame them one bit. You can't blame the players for how terrible this All-Star game was because they listened to all the talk about how you need to take it more seriously. You need to try harder. And you ask them to do all of this stuff. And then guess what? You get to the game and they literally have Kevin Hart in their ear over a loudspeaker insulting them. It's insane how much they messed this up from a broadcast standpoint because you look at the NBA coming off of this trade deadline where there was this massive trade with Luka Doncic going to the Los Angeles Lakers. You've got Jimmy Butler going to the Golden State Warriors, Anthony Davis to the Mavericks. But then you get to the main event of the weekend, the All-Star game, and they make a complete mockery of it. My whole thing with the All-Star game is this. If you can't make it be something that is at bare minimum entertaining, something that people tune in to actually watch, don't do it at all. You say, well, if you don't like it, then just don't watch. that's exactly what's happening. People aren't watching it because it's absolutely ridiculous. The NFL gave up on the Pro Bowl being anything serious, which honestly, good job to them for just accepting, hey, this is never going to be something that people take seriously. This isn't something that's going to work. Let's just make them play flag football. I don't think the NBA needs to go that far. The issue is not really the basketball being played. It's the fact that they pad the entire thing with all of this extra nonsense. So what are some solutions? How can we make this better? Can it be made better? Is it just a complete lost cause? At this point, I do think there is some credence to the idea that the All-Star game, the All-Star weekend might just be a lost cause. A lot of it is just completely off the rails at this point. I don't know if going back to basics entirely is going to fix it, but maybe that's something you try. I think the whole event needs an earlier start time. Do not pad out the beginning of All-Star weekend with all of this broadcast nonsense, having to listen to the panel go on and on about all this stuff that has nothing to do with the All-Star game. If the listed start time for the All-Star game is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, then the game needs to start no later than like 8:05 Eastern Standard Time. There's absolutely no reason that people should have to be waiting a half hour from the listed start time to watch the actual game. There's another big thing that I think the NBA All-Star Weekend needs to implement, and it honestly applies to pretty much every nationally televised game. Get serious analysts and commentators. We don't need the jokesters. We don't need Shaq and Chuck talking about how bad the game is or how much they don't like this and that or how much they don't like how this player plays or that player plays. Get guys on the broadcast who genuinely love the game and are willing to talk positively about the players that are playing the game. Why would people watch if the commentators are just going to tell you how bad the product is? Also, I think they need to raise the target score. The fact that it was 40, the games were just way too quick, especially in the context of this 3-hour time slot. It's pretty simple and straightforward that they just need to play more basketball. Cut down on all the breaks, all the extra gimmicks, all of the extra presentations. Just give us more basketball. That's all we're really asking for. It really begs the question of, why does the NBA do all of this? And unfortunately, there's an answer for why the NBA does all of this. There's a really good tweet from Wilco MCV on Twitter that kind of talks about the numbers breakdown of why the NBA showed the stuff that they did and why they bothered doing it at all. Some of what people seemingly hated the most is also what's getting the NBA the most views. Shaq and Kevin Hart's height difference, 6.7 million views. Kevin Hart and Shaq's jokes, 2.6 million views. Kevin Hart's intro, 1.1 million views. Victor Wembanyama playing hard and dunking has less than 55,000 views. The NBA clearly sees more value in promoting all of this stuff around the NBA instead of the actual basketball. And from my perspective, that's a big problem. But I think from other people's perspective, they don't see it as much of a problem, I guess. Maybe this is a problem with my perspective, is I watch the NBA for basketball. Maybe there's some people that are only watching the NBA because you might get to watch Kevin Hart roast Shaq and Kenny, or you might get to watch Mr. Beast do this half-court competition. That stuff just isn't for me. And from the stuff that I've seen from other people around me that I talk to about this, from people on Twitter, it's not really for them either. So I don't really understand who it's for, but there's clearly numbers being generated that the NBA is looking at, and they're saying, hey, this is what people want. And I wonder how much of that is, are those numbers so high because people are annoyed by it and these are just like outrage clicks and outrage views? Or are there really just more people interested in Shaq calling Kevin Hart short than there are watching the best players on earth play basketball? And if that's the case, then maybe I'm out of touch, but I'm starting to think it's probably more of the NBA that's out of touch than the fans. I'll be honest, at this point, this is probably going to be the last video about any All-Star weekend festivities that I make. I've done a couple over the history of my channel, but next year I'm probably just not even going to bother with it because there's really no evidence that it's going to get better. There's no evidence that they really want to improve the product and make it something that's watchable. There was only one feeling to describe how I came away from the All-Star game last night, and it was embarrassed. I had people texting me who know that I do this for work, asking me, dude, what on earth is the NBA doing? What is all of this nonsense? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea why they're doing it, but it's bad. And if you like it, that's great. I think you should continue liking it, and I'm happy for you. But it's definitely not for me, and I just don't know who it's for. As always, be sure to subscribe and leave a like if you want to see more. Appreciate y'all watching if you've made it this far. I'll see you in the next one.